let's get into the lead topic. Let's audit the Saints' first-round picks since 2015. This week, we're going to do a deep dive on every pick the Saints have made and haven't made since 2015. We chose 2015 because that's when Jeff Ireland started overseeing the college scouting department. Any thoughts on the first-rounders?
Many. Where you want to start, 2013?
I wanted to ask first, before we go pick by pick, do you think this is going to be positive or negative? Do you think 2015 through 2023 first-rounders?
Negative.
Think it's going to be negative.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I think it very recently is maybe number one on the list of what has undermined this team behind, obviously, losing Drew Brees and Sean Payton. There's some big misses on here.
Yeah, the early, the late, the in-between, I mean, it's kind of been their hardest round, and it's kind of fascinating to think about. I mean, you start in 2015, they had Peat and Stephon Anthony, and look, Andrews Peat kind of changed the narrative for his situation quite a bit, I think, last year. But if you want to be honest about it, even the thought process behind that didn't work out. They wanted him to play right tackle. He didn't end up playing right tackle. He ends up being a guard. I don't think you're trying to take a guard at 13 overall. Now, I know he has the Pro Bowl acclaim and all that, but I think realistically, I don't think he lived up to that billing. And I think overall, that pick I think isn't terrible. It's kind of okay, but he got 9 years with the team, so that says something too. But I don't think the idea of it hit. So I would. You could argue that both of these are a little bit off. But Anthony, I think, is the worst pick of the whole entire tenure.
I don't agree with that. Well, we don't know yet if Trevor Penning could be. Trevor Penning would be worse if he never gets on the field. So that's not fair to say that. But he's got competition.
He's got competition for sure, yeah.
The only thing in the Saints' defense is this was a crappy first round in NFL history. This is not one of those they missed on both these guys and everyone else was hitting. I tried to go and find who they should have taken. First of all, I know who some in the building wanted them to take. They wanted Andrews Peat and Marcus Peters that year. They would have had to trade up to get Marcus Peters with the second pick. Marcus Peters ended up going 18th that year. He would have been an okay pick, not a world beater, better than Stephon Anthony, obviously. After Andrews Peat, Devontae Parker, Melvin Gordon, Kevin Johnson, Eric Armstead was a good pick. Marcus Peters, Cam Irving, the guy who's been back, Nelson Aguilar, Cedric Wipe, Bud Dupree, Shane Ray, DJ Humphries, Shaq Thompson. There just are not a lot of home runs. I think their biggest miss, though, was with Stephon Anthony taking a linebacker. I remember this draft very vividly. They needed a linebacker that year, and there was this group of four, and the other ones were Bernardrick McKinney, Eric Kendricks, and Denzel Perryman, and the other three guys all went in round two, and they've all been studs. They could have nailed that pick.
I wanted them to take Eric Armstead. I thought Stephon Anthony in the second. A lot of the mocks I was doing at the time, I had Stephon Anthony in the second round. I thought he would have been a good second rounder for them. I wanted them to take Eric Armstead. I thought it would have addressed the need. But look, they made a mistake acquiring another pick in this draft. If that's kind of how it looked. It's just it's tough there. So looking at 16, how we feel about Sheldon Rankins?
I wish I had done better with that pick, but speaking of doing mock drafts, I think I did my first mock draft. If I did my first mock draft around the time of the Senior Bowl, it had Sheldon Rankins in it, and everyone from that point on had Sheldon Rankins in it, and most Saints mock drafts had Sheldon Rankins in them that year. It was a big need for them. It was just kind of like picking a left tackle this year. It was just the obvious projection for them. When I go back through what they should have done, there's some hits on the offensive line that year. Laramie Tunsil, Taylor Decker, a few picks afterward. Obviously some other picks throughout the draft, but I don't even remember who else anyone was really clamoring for. Later in that round, Kenny Clark went. He's had a better career, but I think everyone was kind of on board with them taking Rankins, and he's sort of in that Pete mode. He wasn't a disaster. He was pretty good. Wish he had been better. Health played a big part of that. What's your second guess on this, if any?
None, because you want to talk about bad drafts, starting with pick 10, Eli Apple, Vernon Hargreaves, Rankins, Tunsil obviously was a good one, Carl Joseph, Corey Coleman, Taylor Decker, Keanu Neal, Ryan Kelly, Shaq Lawson, Darren Lee, Will Fuller, Josh Stockson, Treadwell, William Jackson III, Artie Burns, Paxton Lynch, Kenny Clark, Joshua Garnett, Nimdichi, Vernon Butler. I mean, Ifedi, like, it was not a good draft. So
Paxton Lynch is in there somewhere.
It filled a need. The second guessing it, like, they should have took Mike Thomas there. Like, really, I mean, that's the pick they should have made.
They had a good round 2 that year, which is a continuing theme.
Yeah, so it wasn't a great draft.
Look at round 2 though. Chris Jones is in there. Who else? Michael Thomas made it to round 2. I swear I saw someone else that was just Derrick Henry made it to round 2. Every team in the league, Deion Jones, Jaron Reed, every team in the league did better in round 2.
James Bradbury. James Bradbury would have been a good pick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just a sophomore in high school at the time. And so, like, all of these names, I was like, oh, they're big in college. They're getting picked here, here, here. And I was like, wait, they picked Rankins? And so, I was like, maybe not. But, evidently he wasn't the guy that they wanted him to be, so they moved on. And let's move on to 2017, the home run with Lattimore and Ramczyk.
Yeah,
2 best picks they've made in the first round and the worst round they ever had.
Yeah,
because it should have been Pat Mahomes. I mean, geez, Marshawn Lattimore at 11 and Ryan Ramczyk at 32. The only negative that you can put on it is that they should have traded up and drafted Mahomes because they had conviction on Mahomes. They love Mahomes. I think Lattimore was something like 3rd on their board and Mahomes was something like 4th on their board. They were just on fire that year. If there never was a Patrick Mahomes, everyone would just agree it's, like Ray Lewis and Jonathan Ogden is one of the greatest first rounds you could have.
Yeah, I got no complaints about that one.
Like I said, it was a home run.
Yep.
Let's go on to 18 when they took Marcus Davenport at the 14th pick. What you think, Mike?
It's obviously one of the worst picks that they made, but only because of what they paid for it. I did not like at the time how much they paid for it, or I actually remember being on Twitter all day the next day, sort of arguing back, because after that 2017 draft, Saints fans were very different than they are now. Saints fans were everything the Saints do is right.
Yeah.
Never criticize the Saints for anything. How dare you criticize them? And I was just like cautioning. Just don't say they didn't pay a ton. They paid 2 first-round picks. It's a ton. It's scary. You don't know where your pick's going to be next year. But once that argument gets put to the side, did they pay too much for one guy? I thought Davenport was the right pick at 14 that year. They needed a defensive end bad. It was a good way to get a cheap one. Defensive end salaries were escalating around the league. And if you go back through this draft, the defensive ends after Marcus Davenport, there was not another one taken in round 1 after he was taken at 14. There was one outside linebacker, but it was Leighton Vander Esch, who's a really off-ball linebacker. Then you get to Harold Landry at 41, who's been pretty good, but he was 6'2", 250, not the Saints kind of guy. You got to go all the way to, I guess, Taven Bryan for Jacksonville could have been a defensive end. He was listed as a defensive tackle at the time. You got to go all the way to, to see a true defensive end, you're 46th pick, Breland Sparks, and I've never even heard of that guy. So if they wanted a defensive end, they had to be aggressive to get him. I just hate how much they paid, and if they had stayed put, they could have drafted Lamar Jackson. So that makes this a bad pick, but I don't hate the thinking behind it, I guess.
I think that the thing how I would put it is I would say the scouting was right. It was just it just didn't work. He was obviously an incredibly talented player. Like, everything he did was on film. We've seen it in the NFL, and anybody who says we didn't see it, that's revisionist. That's not telling the truth. Like, there were times where he was the best player on the field in a lot of games, and he just wasn't on the field enough. And then he got into his head, and he had the confidence issues and all that stuff. And it was all kind of stuff that, like, was tough to see that ended up undermining him. Now, I go back and do think about the scouting reports and everything when he was coming to the league. There were whispers about, like, him having a weird personality, which I think sometimes is incredibly unfair. But then when things go wrong, you just tend to tap into, like, oh, man, what did they mean by that? Like, maybe that was a warning sign. Maybe they should have seen it. But that's easy to do in hindsight. Like, some of the stuff about him was like, he's a guy that likes reading books. Like, what the hell does that mean? Like, come on. So it's tough to know what that actually means. But then, like I said, in hindsight, it's kind of like, yeah, maybe there was some he was just a little bit different than regular NFL players.
Self-doubt issues constantly. He was in his head constantly. It wasn't just the injuries, but the injuries probably led to a lot of that.
I think that was inherent to who he was, and then the injuries exacerbated it.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm on record at the time for saying I was uncomfortable with giving up 2 first-round picks for him because I think there's guys who give up 2 first-round picks for. I don't think you should give up 2 first-round picks for anyone who gets picked 14th overall. Like, he deserved to go 14th in that draft. He didn't deserve to be a 2 first-round picks guy. Yeah. That was kind of my opinion on him. But everyone agreed they needed a defensive end at the time, and the cost of getting a defensive end was tough. And it's not like they were missing on 10 other good defensive ends that came out of that draft class.
If he had maintained the highs 100% of the time, though, like it's arguable that it would have been. Yeah. It's arguable that
it was a team that really was like a piece away.
It's arguable that he could have made it a worthwhile and like because he had the potential to be like a 12, 15 sack guy. Yeah. He didn't. Yeah. So, yeah, you're right, though.
It was a team that went on to win 13 games that year, went on to win 13 games the next year. They were a team that was kind of one piece away, which, they're paying for that now.
Right idea, wrong candidate. Yeah.
So they burnt their 2019 pick because they chose Davenport. So let's go to 2020. At 24, they chose Cesar Ruiz, and at 28, they chose Payton Turner.
The next year.
Those are 2 picks. Yeah, 2 different.
Oh,
years.
I'm sorry. In 2020, they chose Cesar Ruiz. So what do you think about them trying to shore up the O-line with Ruiz?
He's got to become more consistent. I mean, I think he's made it okay. He's made it palatable. Early on in his tenure, it wasn't. I think he got to a point where it was okay. I think 2 years ago, he was really getting there. I thought last year he dipped a little bit, and I think he just needs to be just a little bit more consistent across the board. I think he can figure that out. He's kind of like teetering on that a little bit. It's fine. Like I don't think you put an up arrow on it. I don't think you put a down arrow on it. He's kind of just it's just okay.
You know what's funny about that pick is people despised it at the time. And that was the LSU draft. They just won. They just won the title that year. Mm-hmm. Justin Jefferson went 22nd. Everyone was hoping he was going to fall. Patrick Queen went 28th. Patrick Queen wasn't really a Saints kind of guy, but a lot of obviously LSU fans wanted. They both would have been really good picks. Brandon Ayuk went right around there. Jordan Love went right around there. T. Higgins and Michael Pittman went right around there. So just so many more exciting guys, and they're like a guard. However, I actually like that pick more today as we sit here in these chairs than I probably ever have, because the scouting was like, you cannot blame the scouting. 3-year starter at Michigan, like one of the most physical conferences in football. Absolutely, had the talent, the skills, the experience. All the scouts agreed he was a great player. The athleticism. He was only 20 years old. He was young. Like, if you're gonna draft an interior lineman at 24, he seemed like as safe as possible. And now they only have 2 offensive linemen that we can count on this entire roster. So if they hadn't drafted him, would they have 4 holes in their offensive line? So it kind of feels like something they had to do, but there were just way more exciting guys picked around his spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, and I know how they talk about it, but looking at the list, and I think it's league-wide too, honestly, teams often end up drafting for need in the first round, and almost every pick they made in the first round was based upon some type of need. This was one where they kind of got backed into a corner again, and they had to get the interior player. They're doing it again here. They did it with kind of like, it's just kind of over and over. It's kind of a thing that they do. And I think that's one where they kind of had to take him. And it was kind of like, you got to get a guard, because they let their guys go and never replaced them. And it's the same position now. So hopefully there isn't a thing where it's like, it's fine. Like, you want to have a hit, but it's fine. Like, they addressed the need. It's a continued need. They had to do it. And, they got rid of Warford and they had to take him.
2022 was Payton Turner.
2021.
Or no, we're up to 2021 now. Payton Turner, Brandon mentioned. I mean, obviously a bigger disappointment and a pick that I think people hated even more at the time. Nobody liked this pick. This was the one where it was like he was on nobody's big board. He was in no one's round 1. No Mel Kiper, no Daniel Jeremiah, none of them. Until some reports, early that week, that day of the draft. Some teams, which makes you wonder, did multiple teams tell reporters that they like Payton Turner, or did just people in the Saints building tell people they like Payton Turner? But again, injuries are what made Payton Turner a horrible pick. The talent, I don't think he's that far off. I always felt like if he had just been picked 40th, it would have been like, okay, people would have been like, oh, cool. I like the size. I like the length. I like the athleticism. I like them taking a chance on a guy. Just something about that stigma of round one and the fact that no one was putting him in round one. If he had been a second round pick, I think people it would have been a lot more palatable. I remember the guy I liked in that range at the time was Elijah Moore. He has not blown the doors off the NFL. He's had enticing potential, but hasn't really done it. I mean, they could have gone a big defensive end 2 picks later. Gregory Rousseau for the Bills has had a better career, but not a superstar career. I don't know that this one comes with the, they should have taken Mahomes, they should have taken Lamar Jackson, they should have taken Justin Jefferson stigma to it, but it's another pick that obviously hasn't worked out.
Yep. It set him back so far, too. Just the two misses there. All the misses, you look at the cumulative effect, and it's just kind of so obvious. And the areas where they have the biggest issues, it's just these misses. And I'm not closing the door on this guy by any means. Like, he could come back and change the narrative or whatever. There's plenty of time. He's still young. I mean, but to this point, it's a miss. And it's, he has less production than Haioli Kakaha, so it's tough. It's tough to be in that position right now. So, I mean, him and Davenport, neither one of them giving him production, Davenport not being around, Turner on the cusp of not being around. I mean, it's just such an overall
I think
hit.
it's the biggest reason why they are where they are right now. I mean, none in 19. Well, Davenport in 18, none in 19, Ruiz in 20, Turner in 21, and then we're about to get to Trevor Penning being one of the ones in 2022. That's 5 first-round picks that have amounted to Cesar Ruiz being the only reliable one on the entire roster right now. It's gutting them.
Yeah, I think with Payton Turner, you're a big fan of his in terms of believing that he has the potential to just fill in those shoes and make a difference. But I think it's coming to the end, and, he was a small school guy. You know what I mean? He went to Houston. So I think that it might be close to the end.
It's do or die time for him,
Yeah.
no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt about it. He has to do it quickly, or, it's that's it. Like, this is the end of the road for him right here. So he's got to do it, and I think this season determines his future with the team.
Yeah. Let's go.
Yeah, look, I've been hoping that he can resurrect his career and do something with it, but it's been a long time since I've thought anywhere near where he was drafted. That's for sure.
Yeah. Let's go to 22 with Chris Olave at pick 11 and Trevor Penning at pick 19.
One of the best picks they've had at the top and one of the worst they've had at the bottom. And again, same thing on Trevor. I think the runway's wide open for him. If he just becomes serviceable, I think it changes just how you value this significantly. But to this point, arguably in that mix of biggest miss of all, he's given them nothing. Hasn't been able to get on the field. Even Stephon Anthony had a year as a starter. Penning hasn't even had that yet. So, I think there's just so much that he has to do to kind of turn that around a little bit. And as far as Olave goes, he had a disappointing season by his own standards, by everyone. Like, there was a level of frustration that kind of just sat in the middle, and he still put up tremendous numbers. So I remain incredibly excited about his potential and his future. Penning, I kind of feel the opposite.
Yeah, Chris Olave is probably number one on the list of assets you're most excited about on the Saints' entire roster for the short term and the long term, really. And Penning's the biggest question mark. He will be last on that list of draft picks, below Stephon Anthony, below Andrews Peat, below Payton Turner, if he never gets on the field. Obviously, a lot of time left. We've mentioned that Peat could be the path to him. Like, Peat got off to a really slow start, couldn't get on the field, couldn't find a position. So even that would feel like a win right now if he gets to Andrews Peat level. What's funny about this one is it's another cost of acquisition. They made that goofy trade with the Eagles that would have been fine if people's trade value charts would have just said, oh, look, the Eagles had 3 first-round picks. They wanted to get rid of one, and so they gave the Saints a little bit of a deal. But everyone just kind of universally agreed, wow, the Saints paid a fortune to get this extra first-round pick. Why? And then I think part of the reason was they really wanted the ammo to get Olave. They needed a receiver that year. That was a home run pick. But Trevor Penning becomes the face of the, originally that year they had the 18th pick in the draft. Maybe they would have just sat still and taken Trevor Penning anyway, never would have gotten an Olave. But it just feels like, why did you give up all this ammo to have 2 first-round picks that year? And then it just puts so much pressure on the player to deliver. when you give up all those picks. They gave up a future one to have this combination of picks and trade ups. Put so much pressure on a guy to deliver, and that pick the next year almost became like a top
the
5,
issue with
top
the
10
trade
pick.
for me is that it was done well before the draft. Like, it wasn't even because this guy was on the board. It was just they were just like, we want 2 picks, and it doesn't matter who the guys are. We'll be able to get someone, and it's just like.
It was part of their cap strategy, I think. Honestly, that was the year after COVID where they were like, we can't afford anyone, so let's get 2 first-rounders.
Another need-based move.
Yeah.
Those are always, in hindsight, there's some sketchiness to it.
Before we hit Bresee, let's roll back to Davenport. We got a super chat question from Matt. He says, had Okafor not ripped his Achilles tendon, would the Saints not have traded up for Davenport?
No, they were doing that. They wanted the pass rusher. They had to get him. They were too good. They didn't want to spend the money in free agency. So they felt the best way to get somebody, the only way they were going to get someone was by trading up, because if you wait to pick in the 20s, you aren't going to get someone that's going to be a difference maker. So they were doing that hell or high water. I
have a what-if question for you on that draft. We have detailed what definitely would have happened with Patrick Mahomes scenario a million times. I have not ever gotten quite as good of an intel because Davenport was kind of the plan that year. But do you think if they stayed put at 27, they would have taken Lamar Jackson?
No, I don't.
You don't think they would?
Nope. Yeah. I'm 100% certain of it. I know Saints lore with other reporters say it's different. I am incredibly confident in my sources on that one, and I think there was no chance that was happening.
I think that has hurt that pick more than anything, is people saying they should have taken Lamar there.
I would. Yeah. I would argue before God that wouldn't happen. So,
all right, now let's roll to last year's pick, Bryan Bresee at number 29. What do we think about how the big man is produced?
I think he got off to 4.5 sacks. I mean, I think as far as the start goes for a DT, like 6.5 sacks, you're like really good at that position. Like those are like the top. You're in the top half of the league at that point, maybe even higher. And I think he was right there. I think it's just the run defense needs to catch up a little bit, and then you keep polishing that up. I think he has a lot of hope behind him. I think as far as becoming like a really good player.
The jury, I think, is way still out on this pick though, because I couldn't be happier with his rookie season. I mean, there were health concerns, there were injury concerns. He had lost all that weight the year before. Was that going to affect him? Just had a totally clean rookie year. Played maybe even more productive than I expected, at least as productive as I expected, and he should be able to hit the ground running going forward. But I remember, 2 years into Sheldon Rankins' career being super excited about him, and then he just never think of how we felt about Pete Werner last year, just never hasn't taken that second step yet. So I really wonder what time will say for this, but he's on that short list of assets I'm glad that the Saints have right now.
Yeah, he's definitely not. It's not hammered in or anything. But I mean, I think the start was solid, and you build on it. You're on a good path. But we'll definitely see.
And I definitely don't have a what if. I mean, I think we had him in like 2 of our 4 mock drafts that we did that year, and if he was going to be available, it felt like he was going to be the pick. And I don't think there was even any, obviously someone like Sam Laporta was taking a few picks later, but nobody at the time was saying they should have taken Sam Laporta. I don't think he is any, it should have been this guy, stigma attached to him.
Yeah. Bresee definitely produced this year, and I think, going forward, continuing to grow, he can only get better.